Giant Sleepyhead and the Magic Towers. Jock was playing hide and seek with Mary. He was looking for a good place to hide when suddenly he saw a little tower standing among the bracken. What an extraordinary thing, thought Jock. "Mary, Mary," he called, "come and see what I've found." Mary came running up. "My goodness," she said, "what a funny little tower. Do you think it's magic?" They went close to it and stood looking at it. It certainly was peculiar. It stood there square and tall, all by itself among the trees. The top of it rose to the treetops. "Let's go inside," said Jock. "No, look," said Mary, pointing to a large notice hanging on the door. "None but fairy folk may enter here." "We're not fairies, so we mustn't." "Never mind, we might get to fairyland, and you know you've always wanted to go there," said Jock. So feeling just a little bit frightened, the children pushed open the door and went in. "Oh, there's nothing inside except stairs going up and round," cried Mary. "Come on, up to the top then," said Jock, and up the spiral staircase they went, round and round, till they were out of breath. "Here's the top of the tower," called Jock, "and oh, Mary, come quick, there's a lovely sort of fairy airplane here." So there was. It had 2 seats, and to each seat there was a pair of blue wings. It wasn't at all like a proper aeroplane. Jock and Mary were tremendously excited. They climbed into the seats just to see what it felt like. "Whish, whing, whish! Jock, it's flying!" cried Mary, feeling very frightened. "Hush, Mary, it's all right. I expect he'll take us somewhere lovely," said Jock, feeling really rather afraid himself. The fairy aeroplane flew along rather like a bird without a head. The seats were its body, and the wings at each side flapped just like a bird's. Jock peeped over the side. "We are going to fairyland," he shouted excitedly. "I can see the fairies down there." Bump! The aeroplane came to a stop beside another tower, rather like the one in the wood. Jock and Mary scrambled out. They went down the stairs and found themselves in a little room. A gnome sat there, writing in a book. He looked up and saw them. "Good afternoon," he said. "That will be 2 pieces of fairy gold, please." "I'm very sorry, but I'm afraid we haven't any gold. We're not fairies, you see," Jock explained, going rather red. "Not fairies? Well then how did you manage to fly here by our aeroplane?" asked the gnome in astonishment. "Well, we found it at the top of a tower in the wood," said Mary. "You shouldn't have gone in that tower," said the gnome crossly. "It's got a notice on to say it's only for fairies. Well, you'll have to pay for the ride somehow. I shall get a dreadful scolding if I'm short in my payments." Mary began to cry. "Oh, how can we get gold?" she wept. Just then, in came a yellow fairy. She looked at Mary. "Don't cry, little girl," she said kindly. "What's the matter?" Mary told her the trouble they were in. The fairy listened and looked rather solemn. "Yes, you must certainly pay the money you owe for your ride," she said. "I'll tell you what to do. Go and ask old Giant Sleepyhead in that castle over yonder if he can give you some work to do and pay you for it." She pointed to a castle on a hill. Jock thanked her, took Mary's hand and went out of the tower. "Cheer up, Mary," he said. "It's all right. When we get safe home again, think what a lovely adventure it will be to tell everybody." They went over fields and down lanes until they came to the castle on a hill. They went up to a huge door and pulled a great bell string. A bell jangled through the castle with a tremendous noise. Mary took tight hold of Jock's hand. She wasn't sure if she would like seeing a giant. Clump, clump, clump. Down the hall came great footsteps, and the door swung wide open. There stood Giant Sleepyhead, an immense giant with kind blue eyes like large saucers. "Please," shouted Jock, "please can you give us any work to do? We owe some money and we want to pay it back. The yellow fairy told us to come to you." Come in, invited the giant, and led the way into a huge kitchen. He sat down and put the children onto the table beside him.
"Well, I don't know what work I can give you," he said. "You're much too little to make my bed or sweep my kitchen."
"Oh, do think of something," begged Jock.
"Well, there's one thing I'd like you to do, but I'm sure you can't," said the giant. "I've promised to go to tea with my cousin, Giant Wideawake, today, but I feel so frightfully sleepy that I'm afraid when 4 o'clock comes, I'll be so fast asleep I shan't wake up to go. Then he'll be angry. Now, do you think, if I fall asleep, that I can trust you to wake me?"
"Oh, yes," promised the children.
"Well, I'll have a nap now," said the giant,
getting onto an enormous couch.
"And mind you don't forget."
He lay back, closed his eyes, and began to snore so loudly that all the plates in the dresser rattled. "Oh, he's quite a nice, kind giant," said Mary. "Can't we do something for him, Jock?" "I'll tell you something," suddenly said a little voice. Jock turned round and saw a tiny goblin near him. "Look on the floor. Giant Sleepyhead broke his necklace this morning, and all the beads fell on the floor. He fell asleep looking for them. I'm sure he'd be awfully glad to have them all picked up and threaded. The thread's over there. Look." The goblin pointed to what looked like a thick rope lay on the floor. Scattered here and there were large round coloured balls with holes in them. "Oh, those are the beads. Mary, my goodness, aren't they large?" said Jock. "Sorry I can't help you," said the goblin. "I've got to go and polish up a few black beetles." He ran off, and Jock and Mary began picking up the huge beads. When they couldn't find any more, Mary held one end of the rope, and Jock slipped the beads on one by one until all the great necklace was threaded again. Bing, 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 chimed the clock. 4 o'clock! Quick, wake the giant!" cried Mary. "Wake up, wake up, wake up!" shouted Jock at the top of his voice. Snore went the giant. Jock hammered on the giant's toe. "Wake up!" he yelled. Still the giant snored. "Oh, Mary, what shall we do?" said Jock. "I'll never wake him." "Climb up on the end of the couch and pull his hair," said Mary. "That'll wake him." But it didn't. He only snored more loudly than ever. Then both the children shouted together. Then they climbed onto his chest and stamped and pulled his beard, but nothing woke the giant. "It's no good," said Mary at last. "And oh dear, it's 5:15 now. He'd be much too late for his tea party." Just then the giant moved. He stretched himself, yawned and opened his eyes. He looked at the clock and then jumped off the couch in a great hurry.
5:15, he roared. "Where are those children who promised to wake me?"
"Here," answered Jock, "but we tried and we couldn't wake you." The giant hardly listened.
"It's too bad," he said. "You needn't think I'll pay you a penny apiece. In fact, I think I'll give you both a scolding."
Jock and Mary turned and ran out of the kitchen as fast as they could. They ran into the garden, and there in the middle of the path was a little goblin polishing a black beetle. "Is he after you?" he whispered. "Here, get down this trapdoor. It's so small, Giant Sleepyhead can't use it. Go down the steps till you come to the shining cave." He lifted up a little trapdoor and shut it down quickly after them. They heard the heavy tread of the giant overhead. Down the stairs they rushed, and then along a twisty, winding passage lit by dim lamps. Suddenly the passage opened out into a great cave. "A shining cave!" exclaimed Jock. "How beautiful!" All the walls shone with precious stones and glittered like tiny lamps. There was a small yellow carpet lying in the middle of the cave. Jock and Mary went to look at it. "Let's sit down and get our breath back," said Jock. But no sooner had they sat down than swish! The carpet rose into the air, passed through a square hole in the glittering roof, then went up and up through darkness till, bump! It came to rest in the open air on some grass. Well, what a surprise!" gasped Jock, scrambling off the carpet. "Oh, Jock, there's another of those aeroplane towers," said Mary. "Let's go and see if we can get an aeroplane back to take us home again." So off they went, but directly they got inside the tower, whom did they see but the cross gnome.
"Well, have you brought me my money?"
he asked. "No," said Jock, "I'm afraid not."
"Then I shall complain to the Queen," said the gnome.
He blew a whistle. A crowd of little elves came running in.
"Tie their hands behind their backs and take them to the Queen's palace," he ordered.
Poor Mary began to cry. The elves came forward and tied the children's hands behind their backs. The cross gnome hustled them out the door and took them in the direction of a big, glittering castle. As they drew near, they saw a great gate with a flight of steps leading up to it. The gnome took them up, and the gate opened slowly in front of them. Inside was a wonderful rose garden.
"Where is Her Majesty?"
the gnome demanded of the little gatekeepers.
"In the garden by the lily pond," they answered. "Come on," said the gnome. "We'll just see what the Queen has to say to people who use our aeroplanes and don't pay for the ride."
"She can't be so horrid as you," said Jock. "I've always heard she was so kind." The gnome led them up a grassy path, and then suddenly Jock and Mary saw the Queen. She was sitting on a cushiony throne by the lily pond, and she looked so beautiful and so kind that Mary wanted to kiss her. The Queen saw them coming. "Whom do you bring with you, Sativus?" she asked the cross gnome in surprise. The gnome knelt down.
"If you please," he said, "these children have been guilty of using one of our fairy aeroplanes, and they won't pay for the ride, so I'm shorting my payment, all because of 2 naughty children who meddled with something that didn't belong to them."
"It isn't that we won't pay for the ride, but we can't," said Jock. "We did go to Giant Sleepyhead's to try and get some money, but we couldn't wake him up when he told us to."
"I expect they're too lazy to do as they were told and wake the giant up," grumbled the gnome.
"Oh, Sativus, but you know that it's not even a fairy can wake up Giant Sleepyhead when he is fast asleep," said the Queen. "You mustn't be unfair." "Oh, please, Your Majesty," said Jock, "do forgive us and let us go. We won't use things that don't belong to us again." "We're awfully sorry," said Mary.
"Well, I'm sure you won't have used one of our aeroplanes if you'd known you'd have to pay," said the Queen.
"Listen, Sativus, let these children go, and I will pay for their ride myself." "You darling!" cried Mary, jumping up and down in delight. So Sativus cut the ribbons from the children's wrists, and they were free again. Suddenly, there came a tremendous noise outside. Clump, clump, clump.
"Oh, bother, that's old Giant Sleepyhead. What's he want?" said the cross gnome.
"Oh, Jock, perhaps he's come to give us a scolding," wept Mary. Everybody waited to see what Sleepyhead wanted.
"Where's that little boy and girl?" he roared. "Oh, there they are. Well, I just wanted to say I'm sorry I was so cross. I've just found a necklace they've threaded so nicely, and I've got some money to pay them. The little goblin told me they tried to wake me at 4 o'clock, so everything's all right."
He gave Mary a piece of gold and Jock a piece of gold, and then went off back to his castle. "Hurree!" cried Jock. "Now we've got some fairy gold after all. Here you are, Mr. Gnome. Now we don't owe you anything. Please tell us how to get home."
"Well, if you promise not to use fairy things without permission again, I'll send you home in the aeroplane," said the gnome.
After saying goodbye to the Queen, the gnome took Jock and Mary to the nearest magic tower, and they scrambled gladly up the stairs and jumped into the aeroplane. "Here we are," said Jock as it bumped into the tower in their wood. "What an adventure we've had today, Mary." They raced home and told Mother all about it. But would you believe it? The next morning, when they took her to the wood to show her the tower, it was gone. "Oh, they've moved it, so as we shan't go in again," said Jock. "And I think that must have been why it was gone. Don't you?"